When Al Pacino first snorted fake cocaine for Scarface, he had no idea it would permanently damage his nose for decades. But that's just one of many bizarre secrets behind Brian De Palma's 1983 crime epic. From Steven Spielberg secretly directing a scene to a young actress mysteriously vanishing after filming to Michelle Pfeiffer, accidentally cutting Pacino during her audition, the production was filled with strange incidents that never made headlines. Here are the 15 weird facts you didn't know about Scarface 1983. Fact 1. Baby laxative destroyed Al Pacino's nose. When Al Pacino agreed to snort fake cocaine for Scarface, he thought he was just doing his job as a dedicated method actor. What he didn't realize was that the white powder would permanently alter his breathing for the rest of his life. The prop masters on Brian De Palma's 1983 crime epic used powdered baby laxative to create those iconic mountains of cocaine that appear throughout the film, and unlike many actors who simply pretend to snort substances, Pacino actually inhaled the stuff directly into his nasal passages. The decision to use baby laxative wasn't unusual for Hollywood at the time, as prop departments regularly used various harmless white powders like powdered milk, baking soda, or vitamin supplements to simulate illegal drugs on screen. However, what made Scarface different was the sheer volume of fake cocaine Pacino had to consume for his role as Tony Montana. The film features numerous scenes where his character indulges in massive drug binges, and Pacino committed fully to making these moments look authentic by actually snorting the powder rather than faking it. Years later, in a 2015 interview, Pacino revealed the lasting consequences of his dedication to the role. "For years after, I have had things up in there," he explained to reporters. "I don't know what happened to my nose, but it's changed. My breathing apparatus has been altered a little." The actor went on to describe how his entire nasal system had been permanently affected by inhaling so much of the powdered substance during filming. The irony wasn't lost on Pacino that while his character Tony Montana's cocaine addiction ultimately destroyed him in the film, the fake version of the drug had caused real damage to the actor portraying him. Even though the baby laxative was considered safe for the limited exposure most actors would experience, the massive quantities required for Scarface's extensive drug scenes proved to be more harmful than anyone anticipated, leaving one of Hollywood's greatest actors with permanently altered breathing as an unexpected souvenir from one of his most iconic roles. Fact 2. Steven Spielberg secretly directed a scene. Hidden within the explosive finale of Scarface is a single camera shot that was actually directed by Steven Spielberg, creating one of the most unexpected collaborations in movie history. While Brian De Palma was busy orchestrating the complex shootout sequence at Tony Montana's mansion, his friend Spielberg happened to be visiting the set and ended up stepping behind the camera to capture a specific moment in the climactic battle. Steven Spielberg and Brian De Palma had been close friends since their film school days in the 1970s, along with other future Hollywood legends like George Lucas and Martin Scorsese. The two directors had always wanted to work together on a project, but their busy careers and different filmmaking styles had never allowed for a formal collaboration. When Spielberg dropped by the Scarface set during the filming of the final gunfight scene, De Palma saw an opportunity to finally make their collaboration happen, even if it was just for a single shot. The scene in question shows one of the assassins scaling the outer walls of Tony's massive estate, using grappling hooks during the raid on his compound. Spielberg took control of the camera for this low-angle shot that captures the intruder climbing up the side of the building as part of the coordinated attack on Tony's fortress-like home. At the time, Spielberg had just finished directing E.T. the Extraterrestrial in 1982, and was perhaps looking for a way to experiment with darker, more violent filmmaking before he would later tackle serious dramas like Schindler's List and Saving Private Ryan. The contribution went completely uncredited, and for years most viewers had no idea that the director of Jaws and Raiders of the Lost Ark had secretly filmed part of one of the most violent crime movies ever made. This single shot represents the only time these two legendary filmmakers officially worked together, creating a unique piece of cinema history buried within Tony Montana's final moments. Fact 3. Michelle Pfeiffer cut Pacino during audition. Michelle Pfeiffer's audition for Scarface turned into a bloody disaster that may have actually secured her the role of Elvira Hancock. During her screen test with Al Pacino, Pfeiffer was performing the restaurant scene where her character has an emotional breakdown and storms out of Tony's life forever. The audition was going well until Pfeiffer stood up and dramatically waved her hands during the climactic moment of the scene, accidentally sending glasses and dishes flying across the room. What happened next shocked everyone on set, as Pfeiffer later recounted on The Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon. "It was one of those things where it just took. And when we cut, I looked around, and there was blood everywhere," she explained. The entire crew immediately rushed over to check on the relatively unknown actress, frantically searching her body for cuts and injuries that could explain the sudden appearance of blood all over the audition space. The bizarre twist was that after examining Pfeiffer thoroughly, no one could find a single scratch or wound on her body. The medical team and crew members looked everywhere, but couldn't locate the source of the blood that had splattered around the room during her explosive performance. It turned out that the flying glassware had somehow cut Al Pacino instead, though the details of exactly how this happened were never fully explained. Rather than derailing her chances, this chaotic audition may have actually convinced the filmmakers that Pfeiffer was perfect for the volatile role of Elvira. The accident demonstrated the kind of raw, unpredictable energy that the character needed, and it showed that Pfeiffer could hold her own in intense scenes with seasoned actors like Pacino. Producer Martin Bregman had already been fighting for Pfeiffer's inclusion in the film, and this memorable audition helped seal the deal, proving that sometimes the most unexpected moments can make the biggest impression during the casting process. Fact 4. A young actress vanished forever. One of the most tragic mysteries connected to Scarface involves 18-year-old Tammy Lynn Leppert, who played the bikini-clad girl who distracts the lookout car during the film's infamous chainsaw scene and then disappeared without a trace just 3 months after filming wrapped. Leppert was a successful teen model and beauty queen from Florida, who had won over 280 crowns in nearly 300 pageants by the time she landed her small but memorable role in the movie. During the March 1983 filming of Scarface, Leppert stayed with family friend Walter Leibowitz in Miami, and everything seemed normal until the 4th day of shooting. According to Leibowitz, Leppert had a complete breakdown while watching a scene being filmed that involved artificial blood and gunfire. When Tammy was watching the scene, she started crying hysterically, and it got so bad that they had to take her to a trailer, he later recalled. The young actress was in such a state of fear and anxiety that she left the production and returned home to her mother in Rockledge, Florida. After returning home, Leppert's behavior became increasingly erratic and paranoid. She told her mother that she had seen something awful that she wasn't supposed to see, and she became convinced that unknown people were trying to kill her. Her mother took her to doctors for evaluation, but after 72 hours of observation, medical professionals found no signs of drug use or mental illness, and Leppert was released. On July 6, 1983, Leppert called a male friend to pick her up, and they drove toward Cocoa Beach, Florida. After an argument during the drive, the friend dropped her off in a parking lot near a gas station, making him the last person to see her alive. Leppert made 3 frantic phone calls to her aunt from a payphone, but received no answer, and then she simply vanished. Despite extensive investigations by police and the FBI, no trace of Tammy Lynn Leppert has ever been found, and her disappearance remains one of America's most famous unsolved missing persons cases. Fact 5. Pacino burned his hand on set. Al Pacino's dedication to making Scarface's action scenes look authentic nearly cost him his hand during one of the most dangerous moments of the production. In March of 1983, while filming a fight scene for the movie's climactic shootout sequence, Pacino accidentally tripped and grabbed the barrel of his M16 rifle to break his fall, not realizing that the weapon had become dangerously hot from firing so many blank rounds during the extended action sequence. Even though the gun was loaded with blanks rather than live ammunition, the repeated firing had generated enough heat to turn the metal barrel into what was essentially a burning hot piece of steel. When Pacino's left hand made contact with the superheated muzzle, it caused severe burns that required immediate medical attention. "My hand stuck to that sucker," Pacino later recalled, describing how the intense heat had essentially fused his skin to the metal surface of the gun barrel. The injury was serious enough that Pacino had to be rushed to the hospital for treatment, and the burns were so severe that he couldn't return to work for more than a week. This unexpected accident forced Brian De Palma and the production team to completely shut down filming while their lead actor recovered, costing the studio significant money and throwing the entire shooting schedule into chaos. During Pacino's absence, the crew continued filming scenes that didn't require Tony Montana's presence, but many of the planned action sequences had to be postponed. The accident also explains why there are so many shots in the final gunfight that focus on other characters or show Tony from angles that hide his hands. When Pacino finally returned to the set with his hand still bandaged, the filmmakers had to work around his injury by carefully choreographing scenes to avoid showing his damaged left hand or requiring him to grip weapons in ways that would aggravate his burns, making the final weeks of production a careful balancing act between completing the movie and protecting their injured star. Fact 6. Scarface is only said once. Despite being the title of one of the most famous crime movies ever made, the word Scarface is actually spoken only once during the entire 3-hour runtime of the film, and most viewers probably missed it because it's said in Spanish rather than English. This unusual choice by screenwriter Oliver Stone was a deliberate decision to avoid the corniness that often comes with characters saying a movie's title out loud in the dialogue, which can feel forced or unnatural to audiences. The single reference occurs during the infamous chainsaw scene early in the film, when the Colombian drug dealer Hector the Toad is threatening Tony Montana and his friend Angel in the hotel bathroom. As Hector intimidates Tony, he refers to him as cara de cicatriz, which is the direct Spanish translation of Scarface. The phrase flows naturally within the Spanish dialogue that Hector speaks throughout the scene, making it feel like an organic part of the character's speech rather than a clunky attempt to work the movie's title into the script. This decision reflects the film's commitment to authenticity in its portrayal of the Miami drug world, where characters would naturally speak in a mix of English and Spanish depending on their backgrounds and the situations they find themselves in. Tony Montana himself speaks with a heavy Cuban accent throughout the movie, and many of the other characters switch between languages during conversations, so having the title reference appear in Spanish fits perfectly with the film's linguistic landscape. The choice also adds an extra layer of meaning to the nickname, since cara de cicatriz carries the same threatening tone in Spanish that Scarface does in English, but it feels more personal and intimate when spoken by someone from Tony's own cultural background. For viewers who don't speak Spanish, the moment passes by almost unnoticed, which means that most people watching the movie never actually hear the title character called by the name that appears on the poster and in all the marketing materials. Fact 7. Pacino stole Pfeiffer's hat unscripted. One of the most charming moments in Scarface happened completely by accident when Al Pacino decided to play a spontaneous prank on Michelle Pfeiffer during the filming of the car dealership scene. While Tony and Elvira are sitting in a white Cadillac discussing their relationship, Pacino quietly reached over and snatched the hat that Pfeiffer was wearing, slipping it onto his own head while she was looking away and focused on her lines. The moment was completely unscripted and caught Pfeiffer completely off guard, but her reaction was so genuine and delightful that director Brian De Palma decided to keep it in the final version of the movie. When Pfeiffer turned back and saw Pacino wearing her hat with a mischievous grin on his face, her surprised laughter and amused expression were completely real, creating an authentic moment of chemistry between the two characters that no amount of scripted dialogue could have achieved. What makes this scene even more special is that Pfeiffer managed to stay in character despite being genuinely surprised by Pacino's unexpected behavior. Rather than breaking character or asking for the cameras to stop rolling, she improvised a line that fit perfectly with Elvira's personality and her evolving relationship with Tony. This quick thinking and professional composure impressed De Palma so much that he felt the unplanned moment actually helped show Elvira's gradual warming up to Tony's playful side. The hat incident also reflects the kind of comfortable working relationship that Pacino and Pfeiffer had developed during filming. Despite the fact that Pacino had initially been reluctant to cast the relatively unknown actress in such an important role, their natural chemistry and ability to play off each other's energy, both in scripted scenes and spontaneous moments like this one, helped create some of the most memorable interactions between Tony and Elvira throughout the film, proving that sometimes the best movie moments happen when actors are just being themselves, rather than following a predetermined script. Fact 8. The chainsaw scene was based on reality. The most shocking and disturbing scene in Scarface, where Tony is forced to watch his friend Angel get dismembered with a chainsaw in a hotel bathroom, wasn't just a product of screenwriter Oliver Stone's imagination, but was actually based on real drug violence that he learned about during his research for the film. Stone went to extraordinary lengths to make the script authentic by embedding himself with law enforcement agencies and gaining access to FBI and DEA files that documented the brutal realities of the Miami drug trade in the early 1980s. During his research process, Stone spent time with Miami-Dade County police officers who shared stories about the extreme violence they had witnessed while investigating drug-related crimes. One particular case that stuck with Stone involved a real drug kingpin who had used a chainsaw to dismember an informant who had betrayed him to law enforcement, and then burned the body to destroy the evidence. This horrific real-life incident became the foundation for one of the most memorable and disturbing scenes in the movie. Stone's commitment to accuracy extended beyond just reading police reports, as he actually rode along with narcotics officers and interviewed both law enforcement officials and people involved in the drug trade to understand the level of brutality that was commonplace in that world. The chainsaw scene, while dramatized for the film, represented the kind of torture and intimidation tactics that were being used by drug dealers to maintain control over their territory and send messages to anyone who might consider crossing them. The authenticity of Stone's research helped convince the Motion Picture Association of America that the violence in Scarface served an educational purpose rather than being gratuitous, which ultimately helped the film avoid the dreaded X rating that would have prevented it from being shown in most theaters. Law enforcement officials who testified on behalf of the film praised its realistic portrayal of drug violence, arguing that the brutal scenes accurately depicted the real-world consequences of the cocaine trade that was devastating Miami at the time. Fact 9. De Palma released the X-rated version. Brian De Palma pulled off one of the most audacious acts of defiance against the movie rating system when he secretly released his original, uncut version of Scarface to theaters after spending months battling with the Motion Picture Association of America over the film's content. The MPAA had initially given Scarface an X rating, which was essentially a death sentence for any major studio release because most theater chains refused to show X-rated films and newspapers wouldn't run advertisements for them. De Palma was forced to submit the film for rating review 3 separate times, making small cuts each time in an attempt to secure the more commercially viable R rating that would allow the movie to reach mainstream audiences. The ratings board objected to what they called excessive and cumulative violence, particularly focusing on scenes like the chainsaw sequence and various shootouts throughout the film. After the third submission, the MPAA finally agreed to give the edited version an R rating. But De Palma was frustrated by having to compromise his artistic vision. Rather than accepting the cuts he had made to appease the ratings board, De Palma made a calculated gamble that would either save his film or destroy his career. He reasoned that since his edits had been so minimal between the different versions, studio executives and theater owners probably wouldn't be able to tell the difference between the approved rated cut and his original X-rated version. Acting on this theory, De Palma quietly sent his original uncut version to theaters across the country instead of the sanitized version that had received the R rating. The risky strategy worked perfectly, and De Palma didn't confess to his deception until the film was released on home video several months later. By that time, Scarface had already played in theaters nationwide without anyone in authority noticing that audiences were actually seeing the X-rated version that the MPAA had rejected multiple times, proving that the differences between the cuts were so slight that they were essentially meaningless. Fact 10. Oliver Stone wrote it while kicking cocaine. Oliver Stone's screenplay for Scarface was born out of his own personal battle with cocaine addiction, making the story of Tony Montana's rise and fall deeply personal for the writer, who was simultaneously fighting to overcome the same drug that destroys his main character. Stone had been struggling with a serious cocaine habit for about 2.5 years before he began writing the script, and his first-hand knowledge of addiction gave him an intimate understanding of the drug world he was portraying on screen. When Stone first started working on the Scarface screenplay, he began his research in Florida and the Caribbean, interviewing police officers and criminals to get a complete picture of the cocaine trade that was ravaging Miami in the early 1980s. However, this research process was actually making his own addiction worse, as being surrounded by the drug culture and constantly thinking about cocaine was feeding his dependency, rather than helping him understand it from a professional distance. Realizing that staying in Florida was undermining both his sobriety and his ability to write effectively, Stone made the dramatic decision to move to Paris to get away from the environment that was triggering his addiction. The change of scenery and removal from the Miami drug scene allowed him to focus on his recovery while continuing to work on the script. In Paris, Stone was able to kick his cocaine habit and complete the screenplay in what he described as a completely sober state of mind. Stone later described the writing process as his personal revenge against the drug that had nearly destroyed his life and drained his finances. "Cocaine had screwed me so much," he explained in interviews. "It had taken so much of my money that now I needed to take my revenge, and so I wrote Scarface." The screenplay became Stone's way of processing his own experiences with addiction, while creating a cautionary tale about the ultimate cost of pursuing power and wealth through the drug trade, making Tony Montana's tragic story both a work of fiction and a deeply personal statement about the destructive nature of cocaine. Fact 11. Pacino, inspired by Meryl Streep's accent work. When Al Pacino was preparing to play Tony Montana, he made the surprising decision to study Meryl Streep's performance in Sophie's Choice, rather than looking to classic gangster actors like James Cagney, Edward G. Robinson, or even his own co-star Marlon Brando from The Godfather for inspiration. This unconventional choice reflected Pacino's understanding that playing Tony Montana wasn't just about portraying a criminal, but about convincingly becoming someone from a completely different cultural background and country. Pacino was particularly impressed by Streep's ability to transform herself into a Polish immigrant in the 1982 drama, and he felt that her approach to playing someone from another world was exactly what he needed to master for his role as a Cuban refugee. "I was very inspired by Meryl Streep's work in Sophie's Choice," Pacino explained in interviews. "I thought that her way of involving herself in playing someone who is from another country and another world was particularly fine and committed and courageous. Rather than simply adopting a generic accent or relying on stereotypical mannerisms, Pacino wanted to understand how Streep had managed to completely immerse herself in a foreign character's mindset and way of speaking. He studied how she had approached the challenge of portraying someone whose entire life experience was shaped by a different language, culture, and set of circumstances, recognizing that Tony Montana's Cuban background was just as essential to the character as his criminal activities. To help achieve this level of authenticity, Pacino worked closely with Steven Bauer, who was actually Cuban and could provide guidance on the accent, mannerisms, and cultural details that would make Tony feel like a real person rather than a caricature. Pacino also worked with a dialect coach and even asked the film's director of photography to speak to him only in Spanish during filming to help him stay in character. This dedication to authenticity, inspired by Streep's transformative performance, helped create one of the most memorable and believable immigrant characters in cinema history. Fact 12. Miami banned the movie from filming. The city that Scarface was supposed to celebrate ended up rejecting the movie completely, forcing Brian De Palma and his crew to recreate Miami and Los Angeles after local officials decided that a film about Cuban immigrants involved in drug trafficking would be terrible for the city's image. The Miami Tourist Board was so concerned about the potential damage to the city's reputation that they refused to grant filming permits, effectively banning the production from shooting in the very location where the story was supposed to take place. The controversy began when news of the film's plot became public, sparking a citywide debate about whether Miami should allow itself to be portrayed as a haven for drug dealers and violent criminals. Local Cuban-American community leaders were particularly upset about the film's premise, arguing that it would reinforce negative stereotypes about Cuban immigrants and make people associate Miami with the kind of drug violence that was already a real problem in the city during the early 1980s. After just 2 weeks of filming in Miami, the production was forced to pack up and move to California, where the crew had to work creatively to make Los Angeles look like South Florida. The art department and location scouts had to dress up streets and buildings in Los Angeles to recreate the distinctive look and feel of Miami, using palm trees, neon signs, and specific architectural details to convince audiences they were watching events unfold in Florida rather than California. The irony of Miami's decision became apparent years later, when Scarface achieved cult status and actually began attracting tourists who wanted to visit locations from the movie. The few scenes that were actually filmed in Miami, including some shots at the Fontainebleau Hotel and the chainsaw scene on Ocean Drive, eventually became popular tourist destinations. The city that had once feared the movie would hurt tourism ended up benefiting from the film's popularity, proving that sometimes the very thing officials try to avoid can become an unexpected asset for promoting a destination. Fact 13. Martin Scorsese predicted Hollywood would hate it. Martin Scorsese's prediction about Scarface's reception in Hollywood proved to be remarkably accurate when he warned Stephen Bauer at the film's premiere that the industry would reject the movie, not because of its violence or language, but because it was essentially a mirror reflecting their own behavior back at them. During the premiere event, Scorsese approached Bauer and delivered what would become a prophetic observation about how the film would be received by the entertainment establishment. "You guys are great, but be prepared, because they're going to hate it in Hollywood," Scorsese told Bauer, who played Tony's best friend Manny in the film. When Bauer asked why the legendary director thought the movie would face such hostility, Scorsese's response was both simple and devastating: because it's about them. This comment revealed that Scorsese understood something that many viewers missed on first viewing, which was that Scarface wasn't just a crime story about Cuban immigrants in Miami, but actually served as an allegory for the excess and corruption that was running rampant in 1980s Hollywood. The parallels between Tony Montana's rise and fall and the entertainment industry were unmistakable to those who understood the culture of the time. Just like Tony, many people in Hollywood were obsessed with accumulating wealth and power at any cost, often fueled by the same cocaine that destroys the main character. The film's themes of greed, paranoia, and self-destruction through substance abuse hit uncomfortably close to home for an industry that was dealing with widespread drug problems and a culture that celebrated excess above everything else. Scorsese's prediction came true exactly as he had foreseen, with critics and industry insiders largely rejecting the film upon its initial release. Many reviewers dismissed it as an empty, overblown spectacle, failing to recognize or perhaps deliberately ignoring the uncomfortable truths it was revealing about their own world. The film's poor critical reception and modest box office performance confirmed that Hollywood wasn't ready to confront the unflattering portrait of itself that Brian De Palma and Oliver Stone had created. Fact 14. The F-word appears 207 times. Scarface holds the distinction of featuring the F-word an astounding 207 times throughout its 170-minute runtime, which breaks down to an average of 1.21 F-bombs being dropped every single minute of the film. This extraordinary level of profanity wasn't just the result of careless writing or an attempt to shock audiences, but was actually a deliberate artistic choice that Al Pacino defended as an essential part of the character and the world the movie was portraying. When questioned about the film's excessive use of profanity, Pacino explained that the constant swearing served a specific purpose in telling Tony Montana's story. Bombast was part of what we were trying to say in the movie, he stated, indicating that the over-the-top language was meant to reflect the crude, aggressive nature of the drug world and Tony's own lack of sophistication and education. The frequent use of profanity helped establish Tony as someone who relied on intimidation and verbal aggression to assert his dominance in situations where he felt insecure or threatened. The film's profanity level was so notable that it caught the attention of monitoring organizations like the Family Media Guide, which tracks such statistics across different movies. At the time of its release in 1983, Scarface's 207 F-words made it one of the most profane mainstream films ever produced, though it has since been surpassed by movies like Martin Scorsese's The Wolf of Wall Street, which more than doubled that record with 506 uses of the same word. The excessive profanity also contributed to the film's ratings battles with the Motion Picture Association of America, as the cumulative effect of so much strong language combined with the violent content made it difficult for the ratings board to award anything less than an X rating. Even legendary actress Lucille Ball commented on the film's language after attending the star-studded New York premiere, though her specific reaction to the profanity has become part of Hollywood folklore rather than recorded history. Fact 15. Tony Montana, named after Joe Montana. One of cinema's most infamous gangster characters, got his last name from an unlikely source, when screenwriter Oliver Stone decided to honor his favorite football player by naming Tony Montana after San Francisco 49ers quarterback Joe Montana. Stone was a devoted 49ers fan who greatly admired the young quarterback's skills and leadership on the field, and when it came time to choose a surname for his Cuban drug lord protagonist, he looked to the sports world rather than criminal history for inspiration. The choice to use Montana as the character's last name was particularly fitting, given that Joe Montana was known for his calm composure under pressure and his ability to perform in clutch situations, qualities that Tony Montana would need in abundance as he navigated the dangerous world of Miami's cocaine trade. However, the similarities between the two Montanas ended there, as Joe Montana built his reputation through teamwork, discipline, and clean living, while Tony Montana's path to power was paved with violence, betrayal, and self-destructive behavior. At the time Stone was writing the Scarface screenplay in the early 1980s, Joe Montana was establishing himself as one of the most promising young quarterbacks in the National Football League, having been drafted by the 49ers in 1979. Stone's admiration for the athlete's performance on the football field was strong enough that he wanted to incorporate that name into his script, even though the character he was creating would become the complete opposite of everything Joe Montana represented in terms of sportsmanship and character. The irony of naming a violent drug kingpin after a clean-cut All-American quarterback wasn't lost on Stone, and it added an interesting layer to the character that most viewers never realized. While Tony Montana became synonymous with excess, corruption, and the dark side of the American dream, Joe Montana went on to become one of the greatest quarterbacks in NFL history, winning 4 Super Bowl championships and earning a place in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, making the contrast between the two Montanas even more striking.